هي الوجهة المقبلة للمجتمعات يقدمها دكتور باراغ خانا، المؤسس والرئيس التنفيذي لشركة AlphaGeo. Dear guests, a keynote titled Setting the Scene, Where is Humanity Going? By Dr. Parag Khanna, founder and CEO of AlphaGeo, is starting now.
So more to the right. Oh, okay. Ready? Good morning. It's such an honor to be here today. Everyone assembled in this auditorium knows what a privilege it is to gather in this monument, in this incredible testament to human ingenuity that has captivated the attention of the entire world. And I want to channel and harness the creativity that this building inspires in all of us to imagine what directions humanity may go in the decades ahead. And I want to do so through the prism of geography. Geography is literally the foundational canvas on which we build and construct our civilizational future. But it is not one inert, simple thing. It is a complex interplay of geographical layers. We have our natural geography of the environment and ecosystems. We have our political geography of nations and borders. And we have our functional geography of infrastructure and supply chains. And it is the complex interplay of all of these layers that produces the hyper-connected civilization that we experience today. When people ask, why is the world so complex? Why is it so unpredictable and uncertain? Why does everything seem to be accelerating? The answer is because that is how we have built it, because of all the connectivity that we have engineered onto our global geography. The feedback loops among our what used to be just national, local systems have become more and more rapid, propelling us into the uncharted territory of a complex future. And there's a big difference between prior historical eras that we could describe as merely complicated and today's world and tomorrow's world that we describe as complex. In a complex system, the past may not be a good guide to the future. There will be new directions, new tangents, emergent properties, novel formations, new directions in which our system goes that we have not anticipated before. And that is why a gathering like this is so special. Because you, we, the assembled futurists, have an opportunity to work together, to participate in wayfinding, in navigation, in experimentation, to try to decipher where the future may go in a world where, again, the past may not be the best guide to the future. So from layers of geography, let's understand how our systems, our human systems, our social systems, economic systems, are interacting in complex ways to produce the outcomes that we are going to experience and hopefully shape in a positive direction. No longer do we live in a simple world of bounded terrestrial societies alone, with limited political and economic integration and infrastructure, low levels of migration. We have built on top of that global value chains, connectivity of supply and demand among natural resources and commodities, industrial and consumer goods, and economic and financial interdependence. On top of that, we now have digital civilization. There's a great quote by Eric Schmidt, the former chairman of Google, who said, "The internet is the first thing that humanity has built that humanity doesn't understand." And what it has unleashed is horizontal forms of identity that transcend borders and create new collective agencies in the digital domain, stateless corporations, cloud-based companies who don't think about the world in terms of national markets, but rather between connected and unconnected peoples. And of course, all of that is built on an infrastructure, cloud infrastructure, AI infrastructure, the internet itself, which is not actually untethered from geography. In fact, it is a large consumer of the fundamental energy resources that power the rest of our civilization as well. Which brings us to another layer, of course, the biosphere, our planetary ecosystems, in which all of the collective activity from the other layers is leading to hothouse effects, chain reactions, and new directions in which climate is affecting our terrestrial societies. And that is how all of these layers interact, again, hurtling us, propelling us into uncharted territory, with some believing that all of this complexity is something we cannot harness, that our interventions are incapable of simplifying our systems, and we are being propelled towards civilizational collapse. A scary prospect, this interaction between geography and complexity. So where might all of this push us? Let's look at where we are, who we are, and where we might be going in this complex future. This is a map of today. This is the distribution of people around the world, our fundamental human geography, with brighter areas representing more dense concentrations of people. And the ovals are our megacity clusters. Over thousands of years, one of the irrevocable, I think, megatrends is urbanization. We continue to cluster and concentrate in cities, and those are no longer merely just dots on the map. They have become vast archipelagos. The United Arab Emirates is a very good example of this. From the more dispersed 7 emirates of the past, we now have infrastructure linking them ever more densely together, and that is happening around the world. And there's about 50 of these megacity clusters that we can identify globally. But are they just discrete, isolated cities? Of course not. They're deeply connected to each other. Let's layer the functional geography on top of the human geography, and let's soften the political geography. And what do we get? We get an image that shows us in a more perhaps accurate way how our civilization actually functions on a day-to-day level, which is that we are a network urban civilization, a connected civilization primarily built on these cities. And there is no nation, no country that can thrive, that can excel, that can be influential in the world without having great cities, one or more. That has always been true, and it is true today. We talk so much, or at least our headlines are dominated by notions of protectionism, xenophobia, fragmentation. Ask yourself, has the number of connections between cities, airlines, been going down? Is the number of internet cables connecting our economies and cities reducing? Are stock exchanges not trading bits and bytes? Of course not. Connectivity is going up. Cities think differently than the way we project onto countries. Can you even measure the value fully, accurately of a city like Dubai without taking into account all of its connections to other cities in the world? That applies to almost every city. It's most certainly true of the world's most connected city. And so, yes, it's complex. It's very hard to even calculate. Some people speak of quantum economics as they try to figure out the value of urban economies in relation to national economies in relation to the global economy. But one thing is for sure, we are continuing to invest in this connectivity, and we're continuing to be vested in this connectivity, and that makes this a collective enterprise. Now, let's turn to the who we are going to be in this global, connected, urban network civilization. There is another major inflection point that we are experiencing, and it has to do partially with issues like urbanization and modernization and people moving into cities and becoming wealthier, which is that the global fertility rate is declining. And so, unlike any previous generation, and certainly no period in time that anyone alive today can remember, the world population is not increasing the way it did over the past 100 years, from only 2 billion people in 1920 to the 8 billion people alive today. It is peaking and will probably, within the lifetimes of everyone here, begin, in fact, to level off and decline. We are not prepared for that world. No one alive today has experienced it or even heard stories from parents or grandparents about what a depopulating world could look like. It's something that we now have to grapple with and to try to divine what implications it has for our civilization. Now, what it looks like in terms of generational structure is also uncharted territory. Because whereas in the past, every generation has given birth to a generation larger than itself, that too has stopped happening. It's been particularly apparent over the past 20 years, since the global financial crisis, since COVID, and other phenomena along the way. And the result has been, if we look right now at the size of each demographic cohort, millennials, Generation Z, Generation Alpha. Generation Alpha is now predicted to be, and that's today's children, small children, toddlers, babies, will be smaller than Generation Z. So today's Generation Z, teenagers, young adults, are actually the largest generation that our species has ever produced and will ever produce. And it seems to be shrinking from there. But that doesn't mean that the world is aging, even though we have, due to longevity, a major theme of this event today, more people living longer. Most of the world population is actually still young. But if young people have lower fertility rates, then this generation of young people, millennials, Gen Z, and Gen Alpha, are not only the largest generation of the present, they also represent the majority of the future. A colloquial way of putting it is that our children are not having children, or as many children, and therefore the present people are also the future's people. Again, unprecedented. How can we try to map out the future of human civilization and understand who we are, where we'll be, what we want, unless we take that fundamentally into account? So we've talked about the complex world we've created based on connectivity, the demographics of today, and entering the demographics of tomorrow. Now let's get back to how this maps onto geography, because yet one more unprecedented mega trend affecting all of us is climate change. So here what I've done is to layer the demographics, with red being the most densely populated areas, as you saw before, but you bring in what is known as the suitability index, the changes to the livability of a geography as global temperatures rise. And what you see is an alarming picture, of course. Areas that are red are not only densely populated, but are also heavily climate stressed, whereas green are areas that are already not very densely populated, but are actually becoming more livable as climate change accelerates. Now, this paints a very worrying picture, because of course you have most of that present and future population of young people alive today. The future of our species is primarily located in geographies that are increasingly climate stressed. And if we don't invest in adaptation to climate change, and in adaptation for our societies, economies, countries, nations, we will actually be accelerating that demographic demise of our own species. And so hence, when complex systems theorists warn about those chain reactions between our terrestrial systems, our value chains, our economies, our digital civilization, and our biosphere, there is a logical case to be made. Here again on this map, I didn't emphasize the borders. But in fact, that might be one of the gravest obstacles to the adaptation that we need to undertake. At the COP summit, both last year's COP summit that took place here and the current COP summit taking place in Baku, you don't hear nearly enough about adaptation. You don't see nearly enough capital being committed. You don't hear nearly enough talk about the implications for migration of climate volatility. And that's generally the case because, of course, when sovereign nations gather together, they are protective of one of the most sacred vestiges of sovereignty itself, which is protecting the movement, their borders, against the movement of people and controlling that movement of people. But address it we must in this landscape, in this gathering. Already today, despite sovereignty, despite borders, despite the rootedness of our political systems, we are experiencing mass migrations on a scale never before witnessed in history. If you look at the stock and the flow of populations across, within and across regions of the world, these are numbers that are all going up, 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 irrespective of the political dynamics that we tend to focus on in the short term in our headlines today. There have never been as many people moving from Latin America into North America, from Africa and the Arab world into Europe, from South and Southeast Asia into West Asia, into Europe, and into Central Asia. Unprecedented new vectors of directions and volumes of migration that have literally never been witnessed before. Again, complex systems give rise to emergent properties, to new dynamics that cannot be deciphered merely by looking at past patterns. But one thing is for sure, when we ask ourselves what happens at the intersection of all of this connectivity, all of this climate stress, the concentrations of young people in stressed geographies, the likely answer to the question as to the volume of migration and movement in the future is surely more. And what are people looking for as they move? Whether they are privileged and have the luxury of selecting where they go, or if they are being driven by geopolitical conflicts, by economic stress, or by climate change. They're looking for resilience. And perhaps the one-word answer, though it needs to be spelled out much more specifically, to how we cope with the complex world we have unleashed is by investing in resilience. We talk a lot about risk, whether it's climate risk or geopolitical risk. We talk much less about what resilience actually is. And what it is something that actually we can appreciate here in Dubai and in many other places in the world, though far too few, which is building the necessary infrastructures, having the policies to accommodate people, to provide a good quality of life, and to cope with the various shocks that we either can predict or can't predict that are unfolding across the world today. And I believe we have to measure it much better. It can be things like water desalination and flood protection measures and seawalls for climate. It can be, again, social policies like housing and education and healthcare. But investments in resilience are the ways in which we cope with shocks, domestic and foreign. And we can start to map those out. I've been traveling around the world looking for places that offer not only climate resilience, but also the right alignment of policies, of governance, of infrastructure, in order to offer the kind of resilience that people are looking for in a world on the move. And this is not an exhaustive list. It's not only places that are naturally occurring or appear to be green in a climate-stressed future. It's much more than that. It has to be about the preparedness of governance, of governments, of societies to cope with everything from technological disruption to geopolitical volatility and more. And for every star on this map, there are others that I haven't shown, but there's stories to how those places are coping and how those places are preparing for the future. And it's in global gatherings like this where we have to exchange those lessons about what resilience is, how to measure it, how to do it, how to invest in it and implement it. And you'll note that I highlight places that, again, are not only appearing to be climate resilient. Just look at this country, the UAE, places like Singapore, that are among the most adapted in climate proofing themselves. So let's look briefly at the kinds of places that we'll build as we reconstitute human civilization in the future, not just in places that we know, but in places whose populations are growing, in places where these changes are being implemented. How would we optimally design our settlements in this future that is so uncertain, so unknown, so volatile? They would indeed be different, because I hope that we've learned a lot from the best practices of today. And I think many of the sessions here at this conference today and tomorrow at this forum are going to focus on things like this. Improved infrastructure that can cope with climate shocks, community-oriented architecture, especially multi-generational, walkable communities, less dependent on automotive transport, more circular and sustainable practices around food, energy, and water provision, and of course, more robust connectivity for people and goods to move about in a collective fashion. All of those things. Ask yourself today, how many places, not only to serve the present world, the present generation, but the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 generations on Earth, enjoy this optimal, this ideal archetype of how we design our built environment? Very few. We have a lot of work ahead of us, don't we? And so people will continue to migrate, to move, even to be collectively more nomadic than we have been in many, many centuries, in search of resilience, in search of societies that are aligning all of these ingredients, putting together all of these components of a better settlement, of a better a world for ourselves. And as we do that, and as people migrate and blend, one of the other things that will continue to happen is that we will have this demographic fusion of different cultures, melting pots, places, of course, like Dubai. And so, one of the things that might be consistent across space and time is that great civilizations, great societies, are places that are welcoming to people from all walks of life, from all corners of the world. Because it is the great societies of today and the great cities of today and tomorrow that are melting pots, that harness people from everywhere, and talents that they bring to the table. Dubai, again, is unique in the world in terms of the number of people who come from other countries. There's never been a place with this many non-local residents. And yet, that is very much a role model, a template for the future, despite today's politics in many other places. And so I leave you with this thought. I presented several layers of geography: the natural, the political, the functional, and the human. Let's put them all together. And when we do, it creates an image like this, one that is really reflective of how our civilization operates, the world we have built, the complexity that we have unleashed, all of the feedback loops amongst these layers of geography. And as indecipherable as it may seem, it's also an invitation and a reminder that we are in the driver's seat. We choose what to build, where to build, how to build. And when we do, we are reprogramming our geography. Today, it is not optimal. The geography of where people are, where resources are, where infrastructure is not ideal for the future world. It's up to us to make the investments that are going to lead to a new map of the future. And so I challenge you all to think about what your role in that is going to be. Are you going to be the ones who develop the ideas, who design and deploy the technologies, and deliver them to the people where they are needed? Or will you be involved in moving the people from where they are to where the resources and technologies are that are going to lead to a better civilization, a better outcome for all of us? That is the challenge we all face. And that is what applied futurism looks like, that all of you are active participants in. So I want to thank you for having me here this morning, and I wish you all the best for the forum ahead. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
السيدات والسادة، استراحة لمدة 25 دقيقة، تبدأ بعدها جلساتنا الحوارية حسب محاور المنتدى في تمام الساعة 11:40 صباحاً. يرجى الاطلاع على الأجندة للمزيد من التفاصيل.